What we know is when thoughts are knocking on your door and they're coming really aggressively, or they just seem really important in the moment, we have to answer the door. We can't just avoid them. Avoidance of thoughts and emotions is the root of all suffering in life.
Acting on emotions as guides to truth. Stillness. Surrendering to what is. Seeking. Using my gifts with purpose. Light. This is the Emotional Blueprint.
I am very, very grateful for my job as a therapist, because I get to show up and my clients show up and they really want to change. They're a lot of sincere and genuine people looking for answers and looking for specific application on like how to change. And so there's been a handful of topics and like questions lately that have really kind of been weighing on me that I wanted to share and open up about and talk about, that I think is maybe more for me, but hopefully it will also be beneficial for you. So one of the questions that people somewhat ask the most in a roundabout way is like, what is the best way to get started if I want to start feeling better emotionally? And a quote really comes to my mind that I'm a big fan of. And this quote is that the quality of our relationships with other people is very dependent on the relationship with ourselves. The quality of our relationships with other people is very dependent on the relationship we have with our own self. Okay, so what does that even mean? Well, you think about some of the things that you would do to cultivate or to build a relationship with someone else. You spend time with them. You ask them questions. If you ask them meaningful questions, if you want to have a deeper connection. You get to know them. This applies directly to us and how we can start to develop a better relationship with ourselves. And so I want to talk about this specifically just for a second. There's this really cool passage in the Bible, and it says, "In returning and rest shall you be saved. In quietness and in confidence shall be your strength." In quietness and confidence shall be your strength. So let's talk about the question of like, how do I actually start to build a better relationship with myself? A lot of people generally know the answer to this question, that it's like, you have to spend more time with yourself. You have to be like quiet with yourself more. And it's like, but what do I actually do during that time? And so my recommendation is, one of the best things that you can do if you want to start building a better relationship with yourself is you do two things. The first is you take time to just be still and to not think. This is kind of a grounding practice that we talked about last podcast. But then the other thing that specifically that you want to do is, just like we were talking about building a relationship with somebody else, if you really want to have a deeper relationship with somebody else, you ask them questions. If you really want to have a deeper relationship with yourself, you need to start asking yourself the right questions. What are the right questions? I believe a really important place to start is looking at, what am I feeling? What emotions have been coming up for me lately? And then what do those emotions mean that I need? So remember, your emotions are not just random experiences. This is your body trying to tell you what it is that you actually need. And so what's cool about this is this is combining the energy of your whole self. And what do I mean by that? Well, every one of our spirits, our true self, is made up of both feminine and masculine energy. So the feminine part of us is the awareness. That's a part of the feminine, is the awareness, being aware of like, okay, what am I actually feeling? And being willing to kind of look at that. Oh, I've been feeling actually pretty sad lately. Okay, so that's the feminine. And then the masculine is the doing. Okay, now that I'm feeling sad, I recognize that. What does sadness actually mean? What does it mean that I need to do? Okay, so you're combining the really important feminine part of us, of the awareness, but then you're also combining that with the masculine, which is the doing. And this is one of the best places to start, to begin to like get to know yourself better and to build a relationship with yourself. Because if you recognize what it is that you need in your life based on what you're feeling, and then you actually do it, you're doing exactly what this biblical passage talks about, that you are returning to yourself. And in quietness and confidence, you're building strength. So this practice is also really valuable if you have some like codependent tendencies in your relationship. The root of most codependent tendencies is that I am unable, this is all unconscious, but I'm unable to fulfill my own emotional needs. And so I'm trying to employ someone else to do that for me. That puts strain on the relationship, that puts pressure on the relationship, and that negatively affects, any relationship. So you're beginning to learn how to do that on your own. So that is one of the best places to get started, is to intentionally take time. You might have to start to do it every day or every other day, and basically looking at what am I feeling and what does it mean that I need. And we will post that practice and the emotional guide on the show notes and on our website as well. And just to share a quick story about this that I think has always stuck with me. I remember having this client who she was addicted to men. She was addicted to the approval of men. And so she would put herself in these really risky and sometimes dangerous situations just to get a man to like her. And then what would happen is when she would get this approval, or when she would be liked, she would feel so whole. It would be like this. It was a drug. It was like getting high on a drug. But then when she would get rejected or things would not go the way that she wanted, she would feel this extreme depth of pain and sorrow. And what's interesting about her story is that she started to become very aware of this. And when she started coming into therapy, she's like, Corey, like, I know that this is a pattern. She even became aware that the reason why she had this pattern was because it connected far back to her own father, who she never felt accepted by. And that left a deep hole for her. And she knew that she was trying to fill that with other men as an adult. And so the reason why I'm telling this story, what's powerful about this story is what happened next is she becomes really aware of this. Like, she sees it very clearly. And then I'm like, okay, it's good that you see it clearly. Now it's time for us to channel the masculine. Now it's time for us to do the work. She was like, okay, yeah, okay. But something she said, basically she said this without saying it. She said, you know what? I don't know if I really want to do that. Like, I'm open to that, but I'm so aware of this. I am just going to be very aware of it and make sure it doesn't happen again. Now, why does that not work? Well, when we have a deeper wound, especially from our parents or from some past serious trauma, awareness is not enough to break the cycle. Why? Because our emotions overpower what we know intellectually. So it's kind of that saying, you can't see it when you're in it. And in her case, like, love is blind. When she would fall in love with a man, these emotions would become all of her past. It would become so powerful that it would blind any awareness that she had previously. So awareness is not enough to change attachment patterns. We have to let go of the pain underneath it. And so the beginning point of this is to start to take time for ourselves and to check in emotionally and start to listen, basically. The other thing that's been coming up a lot that has been weighing on me, that's been really powerful for me, is it's actually a quote. It's an African proverb. And it says, if there is no enemy within, the enemy outside can do us no harm. If there is no enemy within, the enemy outside can do us no harm. What does that even mean? What is the enemy within? Well, the enemy within is two things. The first is the enemy within is thoughts. That's thoughts that we hold on to. And then the second part of the enemy, the deeper part of the enemy within, is past pain that is still affecting us in our life and is affecting our relationships. Okay, so just like this story of this client, she had this deep pain down there. And so that when she would feel rejected by a man, not only would it be hurtful because she's experiencing rejection in a live situation, but it's also bringing up this deeper pain, and this bruise is just getting punched, and she's getting really harmed by this. It's so important to not just be aware. So not just be aware of the pain, but to channel that masculine and like, okay, what do I actually need to do to let go of this? What steps do I need to take? And that's one of the main purposes of this podcast, is there's not a lot of information out there about what steps do I need to take to really let go of deeper pain or deeper trauma. There's a lot of ideas. There's a lot of general recommendations. Like, you just need to let go of it. You just need to accept it. But like, what does that even mean? And how do I actually do that? That's one of the main purposes of the emotional blueprint of this podcast is we feel like we have the answers to that. Now, the enemy within with thoughts. So that's another part of it. Let's say that there's no pain down there for you. The enemy within it can still take the form of thoughts, or what some people call ego. Why don't we just skip to that? That's another thing. That was another question that came up that's been weighing on me. So let's talk about that. So how can I begin to control my mind a little bit better so that it's not controlling me? Well, the first part of this, it's really important to recognize where thoughts are actually coming from. So what we know in psychology is that we do not control the thoughts that come into our mind. Now, if you believe in a negative energy, or if you believe in negativity in the world, if you believe in evil in the world, I'm going to encourage you to believe in that, because I really believe it's true. And they've done some studies on this where they put a bunch of plants in a room, and they have people like yell and project negativity in this room with all these plants. And these plants are getting the same amount of sunlight, the same amount of water as plants in another room. And in the other room, people are talking kindly to these plants and telling funny stories and whatever, positivity. And the plants that were in the negative room wilted and died like, I don't know the study specifics, but it was significantly quicker. So it seems like there's something there. I have had some experiences that tell me that there's definitely a real evil influence in the world. But anyways, regardless of what you believe, the point is we do not control the thoughts that come into our mind. And they are not coming from us. We are not producing these. So you've probably heard of this like saying that's really popular, like you are not your thoughts. But let's talk specifically about the question of like, how do I actually deal with these? The challenge with thoughts is that they rarely, if ever, come up at convenient times. They are interrupting us when we're listening to someone in an important conversation. They're interrupting us when we're doing things. And so I was just talking to one of my good friends recently, and she's been super overwhelmed and stressed. And we were talking, and she's been like such an inspiration for me, and she's been so helpful for me. And I'm like, hey, like, please let me help you a little bit. Like, I really feel like I can help you. And I sent her, I just want to share what I sent her. And this is this is with the help of a robot. This is with the help of ChatGPT. But I want to just highlight a couple things that I sent to her that I think would be helpful. So before I highlight some of this, the principle of it is like this visual of thoughts are going to knock on your door. What we know is when thoughts are knocking on your door and they're coming really aggressively, or they just seem really important in the moment, we have to answer the door. We can't just avoid them. And avoidance of thoughts and emotions is the root of all suffering in life. Avoiding thoughts and emotions is the root of all suffering in life. So we don't want to avoid these thoughts, because what will happen is, they'll knock on the door, and if you don't answer the door, you'll go and sit back in your living room and you'll be like, oh, okay, like a moment of peace. But then this thought will come, sneak into the backyard, and will bang on your back door, and you'll be like, no. And so you'll try to lock the back door. You'll try to close the blinds or whatever. Then you'll have another moment of peace. Eventually, these thoughts will gain so much momentum that they will break down the back wall of your house and start dancing in your living room. And you'll be like, no. So this is a form of suffering. And this is a form of resistance that they talk about in Buddhism, how we're not going with the flow of the current. When we do this, we are actually swimming against it, and we're just wearing ourselves out. We are actually causing some of our own energy drainage because we're avoiding. So I'm going to talk about what it means to open the door and how to actually do that. But it's important, like, we're not talking about you having to address every thought, but you definitely need to address the thoughts that are strong and that in the moment kind of seem important. So, okay, so here's the practice. Here's my recommendation is open the door, and you have to address the thought. You have to say, hey, I see you, but now is not a good time to talk right now. Like, let's talk tonight at 7:00. And then when 7:00 rolls around, this applies to thoughts and emotions, by the way, but we're talking about thoughts for now. But then when that time rolls around, you have to keep that appointment with yourself. You have to build trust with yourself. You have to do what you say you're going to do. Okay, you have to. If you don't keep that appointment, you blow it off, then guess what? When these thoughts come back, they're pretty pissed off. And when you try to tell them, not now, let's talk later, they're going to be like, yeah, right. Like, you never actually follow through. You need to start building some consistency with listening to yourself and doing what you say you're going to do. And what's cool, you get better at doing this, that naturally starts to translate over into your relationships. So when I first got married, I've been married for 7 years, I think, 6.5 years, is that I've always thought that I was pretty good at like following through and doing what I said I was going to do. And then I got married. And then my wife would say, hey, can you do the dishes? I'd be like, for sure. I'd love to help out. And then I would get distracted. And then we'd wake up and she's like, what the heck? Like you don't do what you say you're going to do. And so I never wanted to be someone that doesn't do what they say they're going to do. And we can't be perfect, but this is what's cool about relationships is they can help us see what we can do better, not only in the relationship, but they can help us see what we can do better in our own life and how we can show up more consistently for ourselves and for them. So her saying that helped me to realize that I need to actually be a little bit better at doing what I say I'm going to do with her, but also with myself. So going back to thoughts. So we have to have a shelf. We have to have a place to put this stuff. If we don't have a place to put thoughts, they just stay there, and then they take up a bunch of space, and they vacuum a bunch of our energy. This is probably one of the most important practices to start getting into first, is having this shelf. So what I do personally is I have like just a designated note on my phone, and if I'm working and a thought comes up like, you need to pay this credit card bill, or, oh my gosh, you forgot to do this, you gotta, whatever. Unless it truly is urgent, which 99% of the time it's not. It's just a deception that it's urgent. We write the thought down or we put the emotion down, and then we go back to it when the time is. We have to do it within 24 hours. Otherwise, we're avoiding. Now, if you're like, well, what if I don't have time within 24 hours? It's like, you need to make time. There's nothing more important that we have our own balance first. It's kind of like on the airplane. That's why they tell you to put your oxygen mask on first before you help someone else. So it's that kind of thing. So you just need to get into a habit of making time to do that. So this is what ChatGPT has to say about it. I wrote this, but then I had it tweak it a little bit. So this is what I sent to my friend. So he that is slow to react is of great understanding. There's a lot of wisdom and understanding that comes when we are able to put these thoughts and emotions on the shelf. Why? Why is that true? He that is slow to react is of great understanding. I had an experience with this recently. I put a thought on the shelf that seemed really important in the moment, and then I go back and revisit it at 7:00, and then I'm like, what? This isn't important at all. It was the great deception of Satan, or the great deception of negative energy, or the great deception of thoughts, is they can convince you of the urgency of the matter. It's a lie. Most thoughts, I wouldn't say most thoughts, a lot of thoughts have lies attached to them. That's just kind of how it goes. And so, okay, so he that is slow to react is of great understanding. Putting it on the shelf. So we are powered by two engines, our physical body and our mind. When both are running simultaneously at full throttle, burnout becomes inevitable. In a busy, task-filled day, failing to put things on the shelf leaves us lost in a constant activity, disconnected from being. Okay, so we don't want our thinking mind to constantly be going throughout the day. And a lot of people blame this all the time on like, I just have a really busy work day. And it's like, okay, but the reason why you're so overwhelmed is because not only do you have a busy work day, but you're constantly thinking in the background. Both engines are running. Our brain, ever restless, tempts us to escape the present moment by pulling us into incessant thinking. It oscillates between the past and the future, creating noise that distracts us from the act of doing. So not only do thoughts take us away from being in the moment and enjoying the moment, but they also affect our ability to do things at a greater capacity. So how can we stay present while doing? I have a really busy day. How can I stay present while doing? The key lies in commitment, and this is what we've been talking about. Refuse to let thinking and doing occur simultaneously. When thoughts inevitably arise, recognize their nature, and mentally setting them aside, categorizing them for future attention. When we do that, something profound happens. Only one engine, the engine of doing, remains in motion. The drain of our energy lessens and clarity begins to emerge. Thoughts that seem urgent in the moment reveal themselves as less critical. To master presence, we must guide our minds rather than letting them control us. Suppressing thoughts is not the answer, like we've talked about. They will only return with greater intensity. Instead, greet them gently, open the door, acknowledge their presence, put them on your note or the mental shelf, and then commit to revisit them at a set time. This practice frees us. This is a very freeing practice. And allows us to fully engage with the present where true understanding is found. So, I mean, I wrote this, but ChatGPT helped out quite a bit because it feels like I didn't write it. It feels like I didn't write it. So I think that sums up that pretty good. So next one, what is the most important quality for me to possess to experience real, meaningful change? The most important quality is what I call humility. A good definition for humility is when something difficult happens, am I making an effort to ask myself, what am I responsible for? And what can I do to make this situation better? I want to share a story that is, to me, a very sacred story and a real powerful example of humility. One of my clients gave me permission to share this. And a long time ago, she's driving with her husband and they have a newborn daughter in the back seat. They're driving through an intersection and someone in the other car was fighting with his girlfriend, was high on drugs, and was driving 70 miles per hour and smashed directly into their van. Sent their car rolling, and their newborn daughter died on impact. She comes into therapy, and I can still see the pain on her when she is telling me this story. And she's talking about her loss and how sad she feels. And then she says, I am filled with so much anger and pain towards this other. I'm filled with so much anger towards this other person. And I know that if I don't let go of it, it is going to ruin my life. And she asked the question, how can I forgive this person? I know that I need to. And we talk, and I tell her that before forgiveness can happen, there always has to be a certain amount of understanding that happens first. And we were towards the end of the session on it, and she believed in God. She was Christian. So I encouraged her to go home and to pray and to ask God, what understanding do I need so that I can begin to let go of this and to forgive this person? She went to bed not knowing what the answer to that was after she prayed. The next day, her husband goes into work, and a man approaches her husband. And the man says, are you the father of the baby that died in the car crash, a few days ago or whatever? And he says, yes. And he said, I've been looking for you, and I just felt that I needed to tell you about the story of, we'll call him Jason, the story of Jason, this man who crashed into your car. Would you be open to hearing like his story and his background? I just felt like I should find you and tell you if you were open to hear it. And he said, yes, please. So he proceeds to tell about this man and the difficult and painful life that he has had and the neglect that he has experienced. This husband then goes home and tells my client what happened. And she said on our next session that when her husband told her this story, that this anger just melted away. And she began she began to view this person as a human and not as a killer. What does this story have to do with humility? Can you think of any other circumstance that would be easier to blame someone else for our pain? And this man certainly was responsible for a lot of her pain. But she had the humility to ask the questions. What can I do? What do I need to do to let go of this? And because of that humility, humility precedes almost every miracle, because humility is being teachable. And there's a strong saying that I'm a really big fan of, and it says that when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. So the most important quality for us to have is to to do what we can to put ourselves in a position to be more of a student and to try to learn and to recognize that we don't know everything. And actually we know very little, all of us, and that there is a great teacher that will appear, whether you believe that's God or nature or the universe, that the teacher will appear and things will happen for us to better our life when we're in that state. I like this saying. So there's another word that is kind of attached to humility, and that is being contrite, having a contrite spirit. I just think this is cool. Being contrite, it doesn't just represent regret for consequences of wrongdoing, but it represents a deep desire to change and restore what is broken. My client had this deep desire to change and to restore what was broken, and she wasn't going to wait for justice. She was going to do what she can to let go of this pain. So from a spiritual perspective, being contrite allows for inner healing when we're a student. By facing and owning our own faults, or facing and owning our own pain, it opens ourselves up to the possibility of a renewal and grace. So, how can I develop this? We have to be intentional at developing it. We have to consistently put ourselves in positions to be taught and to try to have a student mindset. This goes back to the importance of taking personal time and asking questions and looking for answers and studying. Having a spiritual practice is one of the best ways to develop humility. So what does that look like? Well, it means taking time, and it means having questions in mind and looking for answers from people that might know more than us, God, other people, whatever. I want to talk a little bit about sacrifice. So sacrifice has a deep and rich history attached to it in many, many cultures. Sacrifice is a symbolic act to let go of something to make room for something greater. So in biblical times and in Christian times, one of the common sacrifices was to sacrifice the firstling of the flock. And this was the best piece of meat, or the best animal out of all of the flock was the firstling. It was the strongest. So that's a big sacrifice to do that. But it was to make room for something greater. In this case, in Christianity, it was to make room for Christ or healing. So in the process of trying to become a better person and trying to let go of some deeper patterns that you have, it's of course going to require some sacrifice. So what is the sacrifice? Often the sacrifice is first, like we've already talked about, the sacrifice is making time, carving out time for yourself and beginning to look at what you're feeling and what it means. And then acting on that, that's a sacrifice. It's something that I've noticed that people find really difficult in letting go of deeper patterns is there's a lot of sacrifice to it. And the payout is not immediate. I have to take time and look at my emotions and act on them and have boundaries with other people, which is difficult. I have to take time to like begin to like feel my pain and to work through it. This is all a sacrifice, and there's not a lot of immediate benefit to it. There's certainly some, otherwise, we wouldn't continue to do it. But the benefit comes as we continue to do it and gain some consistency. So there's a quote I really like, and it says, "The reward of sacrifice is always greater in the long run than the sacrifice itself." Okay, so just being willing to make the sacrifices that your emotions are telling you that you need to make, and acting on that will pay off. So cool. Let's talk about this question. I hear this a lot. I feel like I am doing all of the right things in my life, but I am still not feeling the worth that I want to be feeling. I feel like I'm doing all the right things, but I'm still not feeling the confidence that I want to be feeling. I feel like I'm doing all the right things, but I'm just not seeing the results that I want to see, feeling the worth that I want to feel. Why? There's this really cool word called gnosis. It's Gnosis. So self-worth is made up of two parts. It's the KNOW, knowing your worth, which is an intellectual understanding and seeing yourself for who you really are. That's half of it. That's knowing, KNOW. But gnosis, GNO, is actually feeling the truth about who you are. And so it's an experience. And it's an experience that we consistently need to have strong worth. So what gets in the way? If I'm doing all the right things, what gets in the way of me feeling confident or feeling consistent worth? The answer to that is unresolved pain in our past. So we can feel, we can know all these great things about ourselves, but if we have some pain down there, it's going to block our abilities to feel consistently the way that we want to. Especially if that pain is connected to our parents. What's interesting is that anytime there's if we're growing up and if there's a strong disconnect, if we never really felt that much emotional support from the same sex parent, so for a girl, your mom, for a boy, your dad, that almost always is going to affect how we feel about ourselves. So this healing journey and getting rid of some of these patterns is looking at how our parents affected us. It's looking at what pain is still down there, and then being willing to go through the steps to let go of that pain so that we can feel more worth. Now, what's cool is like feeling strong self-worth shouldn't actually take that much work. It shouldn't be that hard. And what I mean by that is once we let go of what we need to, then the natural baseline of our spirit is we feel this contentment and this worth. People that have always had confidence or worth in their life, and some people might ask them like, hey, how are you able to have so much confidence? How are you able to feel so much worth in your life? And it's really difficult for them to have an answer to that. And it's like, because they've always felt that, because maybe they haven't had as they've kind of just been in their natural state of who they are. They haven't maybe have gone through maybe some trauma, or especially with their same-sex parent, that disconnect. So So don't just KNOW your worth. You want to GNO your worth. You want to know your worth. GNO. And so, yeah. So that's the goal we're going to talk about some deeper ways that you can actually GNO your worth, and to have that be something that's more permanent. So let's finish with this question. Vanity is becoming more and more prevalent in our culture. And a lot of times it's becoming more and more prevalent within ourselves, and we don't even realize it. And so how do I know if I struggle with vanity, and how can I become less vain? So how do I know if I struggle with vanity or if I'm too vain? Well, is my physical appearance, is how I look, does that cause anxiety for me? Does that get in the way of me being able to connect with other people? Does that affect my relationships in any negative way? If the answer is yes to any of those things, then vanity is something that is worth taking a look at, and how you can have more balance with your physical appearance. Well, why does it matter to resolve this? Well, some of the questions kind of answer that, but when we focus too much on our physical appearance, when it becomes a part of our identity, then we need to look a certain way to be able to feel good enough about who we are. And if we don't, it causes a lot of disconnect and anxiety in our relationships. Okay, so it's very worth. Now, it's important to take care of our body. The balance with this is obviously there's nothing wrong with wanting to look good. And it's important to try to take care of our physical bodies. But often that extends too far and in a very imbalanced way, where it causes some of these problems that we're talking about. So how can I become less vain, or how can I find better balance with worrying about how I look or focusing on parts of myself that I don't like? Well, again, some of this can be more surface, just like thoughts or beliefs you have about yourself. But often the imbalance of vanity goes back to this quote, which is, what I am lacking inside, I am seeking outside. What I am lacking inside, I am seeking outside. An imbalance of vanity is almost always connected to internal worth and approval. So if I'm lacking this internal worth or this internal approval, I'm unconsciously going to seek that outside, often through how I look or things that I buy, or just the appearance of things. Because if I look really good, or if I have this really nice car, if I have the X amount of money in the bank account and that I flash that or whatever, then I will get this temporary hit, perhaps, of approval. And then I will temporarily feel better about who I am. It's an addiction. And it's never enough. If somebody struggles with this insecurity of vanity, they would go to the gym and work out, and they're never, as a guy, maybe they're never big enough, or as a woman, they're never toned enough or skinny enough or whatever it is. So vanity, an imbalance with vanity, is an addiction that stems from not feeling enough. You may believe you are enough, but there's something deeper down there where you don't feel like you are enough consistently. And again, this goes back to the importance of doing what you can to try to listen to some of these future podcasts and really let go of some of this pain that is down there that's affecting your worth. So we're super excited about this journey, and stay tuned. Thanks.
If you have benefited from this podcast in any way, it would mean the world to us to have you subscribe, to allow us to keep it going and bring on inspirational human beings.